Welcome back to Under the Caminetting, an AMST 110G podcast discussing the Marine Corps and its culture. For today's episode, we'll be discussing tradition versus current reality, and the sources I'll be using are records from the National Archives on the Montford Point Marines, official publications from the Marine Corps University Press, and military-based reportings from the Associated Press on gender integration in the Marine Corps. Today's rhetorical question is simple. How does the Marine Corps deal with change, especially when it doesn't want to, or if the culture does not adhere to change? If you ask most Marines, or if you were an outsider looking in, you'd think that the Marine Corps doesn't change at all. This is true in some aspects, in the way that culture and tradition is heavily implicated within everyday life. The Marines pride themselves on this tradition, from uniform to language, up to the mindset. The issue with this is that it is ingrained in the Marine Corps to push back hard against change. You'll hear consistent phrases said by current Marines, such as old Corps versus new Corps, or modern standards are dropping. This mindset creates the image of a Marine Corps that is frozen in time, one that is not susceptible to change. Historically, however, this is not true. According to publications from the Marine Corps University Press, the Corps has consistently evolved, whether that's changes in warfare, structure, or personnel. Warfighting and combative doctrines constantly evolve throughout every operation, and when it comes to integration, we evolve as well. The Marine Corps does change, it just doesn't like to admit it, and the tension between adaptation and resistance is what defines the culture. The clearest example of this comes from racial integration. Before 1942, Black Americans were not allowed to serve in the Marine Corps at all. This changed during World War II, not because the Corps suddenly became progressive. This happened because they had to, due to an intense manpower shortage during World War II and political pressures from higher up. According to records from the National Archives, Black Marines were trained separately at a location called Montford Point. This was a separate recruit depot from where white Americans trained. Over 20,000 Black Marines went through Montford Point Training Depot between 1942 and 1949 under segregated conditions. They had separate facilities, separate leadership structure, and faced discrimination even while serving. This wasn't a smooth or voluntary cultural shift. It was forced change. But over time, that changed too. Today, Montford Point Marines are recognized and honored. They're seen as pioneers in Marine Corps history. What started as a resistance eventually became part of the institution's identity. This is a pattern that you'll see within the Marine Corps over and over again. You first see intense resistance to change, gradual integration, and then institutional pride. This exact pattern is seen when it comes to women serving in the Marine Corps. Women have technically been part of the Marine Corps since World War I, and in very large numbers during World War II. However, their roles were highly limited. They were excluded from combat arms jobs, especially the infantry, and that limited both their experience and advancement. For context, majority of roles that women served in the Marine Corps were usually administrative or in supply chains and logistics. That didn't fully change until 2010, when combat roles were officially opened to women. And just like before with the Montford Point Marines, this shift wasn't universally accepted. According to reporting from the Associated Press, based on military data and political discussion, there were real concerns within the Corps about how integration would affect performance and cohesion. Those concerns weren't political, they were operational concerns, at least from the perspective of the Marines raising them. But despite the resistance, the change happened, and just like racial integration, over time it becomes normalized, and what was once controversial became standard. I'd like to pull some experience from my time in the Marine Corps with women serving. One thing to note regarding standards and performance, certain MOS's jobs, specifically combative arms jobs, have a separate set of performance standards. That means the institutional physical fitness standard does not necessarily apply to these combative arms. They have their own set of physical standards that must be met, regardless of gender. The main concern that individuals had during 2010, when these combat arms roles were opened up to everyone, was the change in the institutional physical fitness standards based on gender, which we still see today. Women don't have to run as fast as men to get the same score, nor do they have to do the same amount of pull-ups, for example. However, in combative roles, such as the infantry, there are milestones and markers that you must hit regardless of your gender, or else you will be removed from that role. And those milestones and markers are irregardless of gender. So what does this mean? This means that regardless of who you are, what your gender is, if you want to be in a combat role position, you must meet this specific standard. So, at least from personal observation, this argument didn't necessarily hold much weight, since combat roles already have a standardized physical fitness performance standard outside of the institution, regardless of your gender. Moving on, let's discuss when Marines disagree with leadership. Whether leadership is a president, a decision in war, or a policy that doesn't make sense on the ground. From an outsider, you would assume that Marines would follow blindly or fully agree with leadership. Neither of those assumptions are accurate. The Marine Corps is, in fact, built on discipline and chain of command, and this system is designed so that decisions are made at a high level and then executed at lower levels. This doesn't mean Marines don't think critically. Officers, especially, are trained to analyze and advise. That's room for discussion and disagreement internally. But once a decision is made, it gets executed. And we've seen that dynamic play out across multiple conflicts: Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, where Marines on the ground sometimes question strategy or long-term goals, but still carry out their mission. I would like to point out one thing when it comes to Marine Corps culture. It's their motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. We see it today in Iran. I know a few people who are on ships right now, sailing off the coast of Iran, getting ready to seize Karg Island. A lot of them don't know why they're there. A lot of them disagree with why we're there. A lot of them think that this is unnecessary. However, within the culture of the Marine Corps, they're always faithful to the mission. And when they do operate, they know that they're not going to be taking the island or conducting ground operations in Iran for the country. They're going to do it to make sure that their friends next to them stay alive. The reality is this: Marines can question things internally, but externally, the execution of the mission will always come first. At the end of the day, the Marine Corps isn't a debate forum. It's a warfighting organization. When we look back at everything, the Marine Corps isn't actually unchanging. It's a constantly evolving institution. Culturally speaking, though, it frames that evolution as continuity. Marines will deal with change in a very specific way. They'll complain, they'll joke, they'll compare it to how things used to be back in the old Corps, and every generation says the next one is worse. But that's not new, that's simply just part of the system. It's how the Corps maintains identity while still adapting to reality. So what is the Marine Corps when it comes to change in culture? It's not static. It's not purely traditional. It's a system balancing tradition and adaptation, discipline and change, identity and necessity. And the reason it works is because it does both, even if it pretends it doesn't. Thank you for listening on today's episode.